There are 5 things that can change how elections work in America and make things better for everyone. American elections are the longest in the world and the most expensive. Here's 5 things we can do to make things better for everyone and to make it a more reliable, robust, and independent system where normal people can run for office, where normal people can win, and where things can get better in America for normal people, the average citizen in America, and not just billionaires, not just special interests, and not just a few old boys who've been in office forever and ever and ever. The first thing that can be done is gerrymandering. Now, gerrymandering is when you cut up an electoral district in order to favor one side or the other. So if it wanted to be Democrat, they'll cut it out to be more Democratic, and if it's Republican, they'll cut it out to be more Republican. And so you'll see these bizarre maps, like this one here, which make no sense except for how to win an election without the consent of the people. The whole point of gerrymandering is to treat the voters like a chessboard, and that you move parts around in order to get a victory in an area where you actually would be the minority party or a party who would never get into office if you had to ask the consent of everyone you governed. Now, the funny thing about these districts is once people get into office, they can make policies that affect everybody, but the way they're gerrymandered, these bizarre designs, they can get into office without those people's consent. So basically, it's governing without consent. You're basically getting elected by a minority of people, with whichever party, whichever ideology, and then you're governing for everyone. Districts should be based on their historical maps where you get a mix of Republican, a mix of Democrat, a mix of independent voters and nonpartisans and just average people voting. Because that's how you govern democratically. Governing with gerrymandering will get you hyper-partisan politicians. Because if they have these small, bizarre districts that are like 98% Republican or 98% Democrat, the people who represent them are either very radical or not worried at all about re-election, which means they can do controversial or bad things for the public and not have to worry about losing their seat because people are going to vote Democrat or Republican. They're going to change their whole identity in between elections. They're going to just stick with you no matter what. At least the majority will. And no matter how bad you are. You can be robbing people, you can be stealing directly, you can be getting arrested for crimes, threatening journalists, and you can still win. That is a byproduct of gerrymandering. It's screwing with the voters. Number 2 is equal time. There's already a law for equal time where people running for office can request the same time as their opponent at similar rates for ads. And that is a good law. However, what should really happen is that should be applied to candidates' appearances. Because not everyone can afford to run ads. Not everyone can afford, even if they give you at a good rate, a national ad campaign for millions of dollars. Most people can't. Most races are for low-level offices that actually matter, that actually affect the day-to-day workings of America. And so if you want it to run well, you have to let normal people who are good and ethical run for office instead of requiring them to be wealthy in order to win. Because it's very, 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 very rare that you'll win an election with people never hearing your name before the day in which they have to choose. So they actually have to hear your name, which means you have to run ads. Or you have to appear on TV. And so that's where the equal time rule should apply. It should apply to appearances, not ads, because of Citizens United and the ability of companies in America to use free speech so they can pay for ads even if they're super PACs, and that's fundamentally changed America. However, the likelihood of limiting that is something much into the future. What we can do now is have it so that anyone running for office gets equal time. So when you do an interview, they get equal time, 5 minutes apiece, 10 minutes apiece, and then people actually have to run on their ideas and the content of their character. There's a lot of psychology into play with ads and political ads, especially one in which says that you have to be seen 6 or 7 times before people remember the ad, or so that's why you get bombarded with them. They know even if it's negative, even if you get annoyed by it, the name will click in, and that's really what they're going for. It's not whether you love them, because they know you're going to vote for your side, regardless most likely, but whether you remember the name. So they just sear it into your mind. Applying the equal time to interviews. So everyone's interviewed and gets a chance to say and answer questions in a public way equally, as opposed to doing interviews after people have already been knocked out of the race because of the top two funders and ads. If early on people are given interviews and everyone gets equal time, they'll be able to stay in the race longer and be more effective in their race with a lower budget. Even though they're getting outspent with ads, the interviews with their actual real live appearances of the candidates, if that's equal time, you'll be on equal footing to fight back with questions and answer things in interviews and make a good impression. And those ads, no matter how much money you throw at an election, won't make the candidate look good when they're face to face. You can have fan favorites, but you won't have anybody guaranteed just by money alone. The third thing you can do is reducing the time of elections. Now, ads play into this as well. When you have people who are required to run for office for a long period of time, one, they have to quit their job because it's a full-time job running for office, especially president or senators or governors. These really big jobs, usually you have to put your job aside for quite a while to run if you're going to win. And so the length of the elections is insanely long in America. In Japan, it's 12 days by law. In France, it's 2 weeks. In Canada, it's 36 days, was the longest in 1926. And in UK, it's usually 5 to 6 weeks for like choosing very powerful positions. In America, it's like 500 plus days. So you can see from those numbers alone that America takes way, 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 way longer to run elections. This has many effects. One, it wears down the public from participating, so we get much lower participation. Two, it requires an insane amount of money and investment. So you pretty much have to sell out just to stay in the race because it's incredibly hard to get enough money to stay in the race. And you can, these little games can be played with ads against you and opposition research by huge firms and the psychological warfare that you can't really fit into 12 days. You can't really fit that in. There's only so much mindfuckery you can do in 12 days to a population. Whereas if you give them 500 days, you can lay a slow, insidious game plan that you can, manipulate people over long periods of time with ads and TV appearances and news appearances and radio appearances and hitting people from all angles until they get worn down and just accept whatever they're given because they've heard it so much they don't know any other reality. Because 500 days is a lot of days to be gaslighting somebody. The fourth thing that can be done is banning lobbying with financial resources. So the fact that in America it's legal, the lobbying profession is legal, is something rather controversial worldwide. You don't have this profession of people, and a thing you can give on a business card where you bribe and influence politicians. That's usually done behind closed doors because that's illegal. America is essentially legalized crime. Now, there's good versions of lobbying where they're fighting for, the disabled or like veterans or something like that, and that's legitimate, and you need those people in order to pass legislation to actually help people. And there's many different causes that lobby. However, the corporate interests with huge financial resources tend to just win out and tend to get policies passed and legislation pre-wrote and passed immediately without the lawmaker rarely even looking at it. Like you can see like in laws they'll still like leave the logos in from companies that have written the templates. Like all they do is insert the name and the date, like some child doing a horrible forgery in their school homework. And it's ridiculous. And that is a product of lobbying. Now, America did pass something called Citizens United. Citizens United is a little more complicated issue than it's usually given credit for. On the Democratic side, usually you hear Citizens United is the thing of corporations trying to crush the little man. And it's about corporate interests in elections and them being allowed to throw around money and change everything they want, which is true to a degree. But also it's important to mention that something that most people don't know on the left, which is that it was actually, Citizens United was about a film about Hillary Clinton. And is about the ability of companies to publish things that affect elections. Now, on the first hand, you would think, okay, well that makes sense. We don't want corporations influencing elections. But then you realize, wait a minute, So politicians can ban things that they don't like, especially around election time. So publishing usually requires somebody to disseminate that information, whether it's a platform or whether it's a book published or a movie. These require multiple people, require budgets and a team. And usually it's not done by a single person running around. It's usually a team, usually with a budget. Even if it's small or shoestring, it's still budget. That could be called a corporation. That could be called, undue influence into an election. So basically, negative news on politicians would be, to a significant degree, banned. That is insane. Nobody wants to live in that world in the West. Like, it's ridiculous to assume that it would be happening in America, where it's the freedom of speech. It's like one of the most defining characteristics of the country. So, what does that mean? So, campaign finance reform, can you really just stop companies from putting money into elections? It's complicated. And the fifth thing you can do is increase participation. Some countries have electronic voting. Estonia was a leader on this way back around the turn of the millennium, and they've been doing it reliably since. All sorts of countries across the world both pay taxes online, which is also nice, but they have elections online, and there's no reason why, if you have a credit card, your finances, the most core things to your business are all online, that elections can't be either. There's no technological reason for that. Things are not safer because they're on paper, because even on paper they're recorded in a computer. So you'd never get around that. When you calculate in the hundreds of millions, there's no way you're not going to be using a computer at some point. Most of these people have difficulty multiplying, 9 times 7, who are volunteering, just simply because math is not a great attribute in most people. And if you're having people do calculations and estimations of things, because often they'll want to know results before the results are out, you'd put those information into a computer system or electronic voting machines, and either way you're susceptible to hacking either way. So if you're going to go with it, you go with it all the way, and you make it convenient so people can vote from home online. And you just make the punishments for those violations, both locally and internationally, severe enough to motivate any technological feat to screw with the elections. Because if it's painful enough, people just won't do it. It's used all the time in most government things. It's not like it's impossible to hack into major government agencies. It actually takes very little skill, and most programmers can do it when they're young. They don't do it because they know the jail sentences are severe enough. It's not worth doing. So that's how the government protects almost every agency within it, is through the fear of punishment. It's not that you can't break into Department of Labor and get all the unemployment statistics or whatever, or break into Veterans Affairs and get records on people who are off the books who are vets. Like, you could do all those things. It would be very easy. You could the thing about it is, even if they are incompetent for 5 years and you get away with doing it, eventually the statute of limitations on those crimes that are federal are quite lengthy, and 20 years down the line, 10 years down the line, you can get arrested and go to jail for the rest of your life. So it's just not worth it. You could do the similar thing with federal elections, and allowing people, at least for presidential and national and senators and House of Representative races, to be able to vote online. Also, some countries have a tax credit, which can go a long way to motivating people. If people think there's a financial incentive to them actually going and voting, even if they're not particularly enthusiastic, they will show up. Now, this has mixed results, because sometimes on local and mayoral and city council races, you'll see people taking names, maybe because they rhyme, which is actually a real thing. Rhyming names are like free adverts. But the thing about it is, you will get a mix of more participation, but less enthusiasm for actually checking who you're voting for. So there needs to be this balance between better interviews, less gerrymandering, so the districts are better, so that you're getting a mix of opinions and not just a single opinion. You're getting equal time for people getting interviewed. You're getting shorter elections, so people can actually pay attention for 2 or 3 weeks and actually get a hold on who's running for office, and not have to put in years and years and years that which no normal person can keep up with. And with a limitation on lobbying and special interests being somewhat mitigated, those everyday people showing up to vote can make a real difference. and the American election system can be on the right track.